Next time your bro's thinking, I can't do this, I'm just gonna quit, how can I possibly overcome these odds? I want you to remind them of the British Empire in World War II, cause it doesn't get much more dire than this situation right here.
It is July 1940. All Europe is in the clutches of the vilest tyrant to ever walk the earth.
I like his little skinny mustache there too. Bro, the laugh is
United
crazy.
Kingdom, am the only one left standing against him.
Britain stands alone with all my colonies.
It was good fortune that placed the English Channel between myself and the continent.
Yes.
My allies were not so lucky.
They just had a moat. That's it. They had a moat. Nobody else had a moat.
Perhaps I'm not lucky either. How long can a small sea truly protect me? It's true. I have thought of making peace. But do the Germans feel the same? They ended the Peace of Locarno. They violated the Treaty of Munich.
Bro is mad right here, which is completely understandable, not gonna lie.
Now, they invade any nation they will. How long before they betray this new peace made at gunpoint?
This is gonna be exciting. This is such an interesting POV because this is the most crucial time in all of World War II. Obviously, if you're looking at it like a month-by-month breakdown or a year-by-year breakdown, you're not like really thinking about this small moment where the Germans were very, very close to either white peacing or just like coming to a ceasefire or something. This is the scariest moment. Before Germany declares war on the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, before the Americans are involved, before the Japanese do Pearl Harbor.
I must fight, even if that means losing my wealth, my empire, or even my very existence.
This is so epic.
Britain
This is so epic.
truly stands alone.
You want to know why the British look the way they do right now? In a way, it can all stem back from this moment here. They decided they were willing to sacrifice their entire empire just to stop Germany for World War II.
Dad, what about me? I'm still in the war like you asked.
That's Canada.
Yeah, us too.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad he's making a mention of this. This channel is called Call Me Ezekiel. I absolutely love his country ball art.
And what about me? I brought plenty of troops to continue the fight.
There's
And
Poland
how about
and
us other governments in exile?
the free fighters of France.
Germany. As I said,
Don't worry about that.
completely
Alone.
so you can call me Ezekiel. And this is why Britain continued fighting after the fall of France and how they survived it alone.
Completely. Okay, something does need to be said. I mean, obviously the Brits had a big team backing them up still, but obviously it was still a lot to overcome overall. Because remember, this is only the year 1940. If only we could go back. Actually, I don't want to go back. That'd be horrifying. But just to properly get your mind in this mindset where obviously the fall of Paris has occurred and that's it. The Germans literally control all of continental Europe. Like, the worst nightmares, if you're British, has come true. Literally. Well, your worst nightmare would be that the Germans now invade successfully the British Isles, but they were definitely bombing the crap out of London, that's for sure. Why stand alone? Why do they do it? Why do we do hard things? Not because it is easy, but because something JFK.
By July 1940, the German Reich concluded one of the most spectacular military campaigns in history.
Because they were punching people out in like hours. We were not prepared for, or they were not prepared for this level of warfare. They all thought it was going to be like World War I, nice, slow, trench warfare. Nope. Technology completely got flipped on its head for World War II.
Their Wehrmacht, an inferior...
The BEF used Matilda tanks in the Battle of France, not Churchill's.
superior force by virtually every measure.
That's fine.
Defeated in rapid succession.
Like
Poland,
the correction, though.
Denmark,
Respect.
Norway, the Low Countries, France, and the British Expeditionary Forces supporting them.
Yeah, because then Dunkirk had to happen. The Brits had to kind of run with their tail between their legs. Obviously, they framed it as like a beautiful, great, brave victory. But at the end of the day, it was a retreat. It was the British retreating back to their little island.
Now Germany stood supreme on the
Bro,
continent.
the laughing is scary.
Much of this success can be attributed to the Wehrmacht's superior leadership,
Yeah.
daring German diplomacy, and an incredible string of good luck.
I could just been as surprised as do.
Shocking incompetence from French and British military leadership also played its part. But
there's so much to be said about that. I mean, remember the whole phony war. While the Germans are attacking Poland, the French and the Allies, the other allies like the British, they don't really do anything. They don't want war.
Desperation breeds determination. Just as inferior German forces triumphed over Allied armies in the beginning of 1940, the second half of that year would be the Allies' turn to face impossible odds and emerge.
This is one of my favorite things to talk about World War II. That's why I'm so excited to review this video, just because, again, if I'm British at this time, even if I'm an American at this time, I'm looking at this newspaper and I'm like, oh, it is hopeless. I just watched Germany, like he said, in quick succession, take out Poland, Denmark in 6 hours, Norway, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Belgium, and then France. Big France. That never happened in World War II. You have to keep yourself in the context of World War I. More than likely, let's just assume that I was around, or at least I saw or studied about World War I, where the Western Front line didn't really move much. It was trench warfare. It took, you had to sacrifice like 50,000 lives to gain 10 yards. That's how it was. All of a sudden, Germany is now knocking countries out of the war. Boom, in hours. It's like, oh, they have some sort of alien technology. This is hopeless. The Brits are done.
If not victorious, certainly far better off than when they started. A luxury our dear Poland, abandoned by his allies and occupied by Germany and Russia, would not enjoy. Speaking of which, I wonder what he's up to.
Occupied nations waiting room. That's so funny. So you have, okay, so these are all the countries that have been knocked out. Now, not only were they just some of these countries were not just knocked out by the Germans. I think we're going to talk about some of the Soviets.
Look at the sweet new artistic masterpiece I created.
That's so funny. The plunger. It's so
Poland.
Beautiful.
That's a plunger.
Hell yeah. Idiot!
Well, screw
loser!
You guys. I'm getting new, better friends.
Hell yeah.
Which is possible through today's sponsor, Poly AI.
Oh!
Poly
AI!
Why would Britain even do this? Why stake centuries of empire on a war that was clearly lost?
That's the thing. I wonder, do the British manage to keep their empire if they do surrender to Germany? That's an inch. This one might get me in trouble. This one might get me in trouble, actually. I feel like it's maybe if they just do a ceasefire and they're like, you know what? I'm going to be the British Empire. I'm going to be selfish. I just want to keep my stuff. Go ahead. Have Europe. We'll do a ceasefire. You do your thing. We're going to do our thing. I think maybe there is a chance that the Brits do manage to keep their empire, and their empire being, modern South Asia, the crown jewel, Canada, Australia is right here.
Even if the full extent of coming damages weren't...
Because then you're going to have to fight Germany for the upcoming next several decades. I mean, you might still kind of crumble, and you're going to have to kind of work with this guy, and it actually doesn't guarantee your freedom. You actually might still... I mean, you got to remember that Germany, you can't trust them. Like, the Brits were trying to appease him for a while there, and he just wasn't listening. So at this point, it's like, well, maybe he'll give you a ceasefire for now, but at what point will he just decide to invade you like he did everyone else?
It's clear. It was obvious that British finances would be irrecoverably ruined by the war effort. So why did they keep fighting? There were 3 reasons. First is the centuries-old British grand strategy.
Oh, man. I like this. I'm loving this little... Look at this. Okay, so what are we talking about? Grand strategy. Are we talking about... it's continental Europe, otherwise known as godless savages.
Britain's status as an island nation allowed it to...
Bro, look at this map. This is an incredible map. I love this.
...naval power over its army.
Yes. The Brits, never really known for their army. However, they did get some pretty big dubs. Let's not disregard the British army. They did get some pretty big dubs. However, number one priority was their boats because they're an island. You have a stronger navy than everybody else, you're going to be safe forever.
Britain's status as an island nation allowed it to favor naval power over its army, which
also coincided with making such a great grand empire, because then having a strong navy is perfect, because then that can go into trade and economy and protecting your own trade routes and just colonizing other places with your boats as well.
Alone keep invaders off its shores. No continental power could neglect its army the way England could, lest they make themselves vulnerable to one another.
Everyone says, the Brits are only great because of the thin strip of water that separated them from the rest of Europe. I mean, they were given the ultimate gift from God. Is just that I mean, you can literally see on a clear enough day from France the island of Great Britain. It's not that far away, but at the end of the day, that strip of water is there, and that is what changed their entire course of history.
This meant the Royal Navy could defend against one or even a few continental powers.
At the same time,
but a united Europe would surely overwhelm it. As a result, Anglo policy would always be to prevent the unification of Europe under a single alliance or state.
And people wonder why the Brits are so hated. Remember, the Brits were hated for so long. I mean, I guess even to this day, the Brits are not very much liked, but by certain, obviously, nations and cultures and things like that. But they were very good at maintaining. Remember, after the Napoleonic Wars, the number one thing for the Brits was just to, what they referred to it as, which is great PR, maintain the balance of power. We just want to make sure that everyone stays balanced and everyone, the power is fractional. As long as we can keep everyone fighting amongst each other, then we're going to be okay. We just can't be forced to fight everyone at the same time. That's the only way we lose.
A policy so important that the British would pursue it even to the brink of annihilation, as nearly happened against Napoleon, and as they are about to do again against Nazi Germany. The second reason was diplomatic. Much like the Treaty of Amiens.
Yeah, remember, the UK cannot allow one single power to get everything in Europe. That's the only way they lose.
Napoleonic France, the British
and Germany, unfortunately for them, was going to basically do that.
Extended favor.
As it says here, we all agree more conquests, correct? We promise. Oh, sorry. We all agree no more conquests. We promises Napoleonic France. Then why am I getting deja vu?
Favorable terms to Nazi Germany several times, only for their supposed partner to accept and then issue more.
Not even 5 minutes later. Bonk, 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 bonk.
Demands. Even if the Germans were to.
That's funny, dude. I mean, now we kind of lull at it. You know, we kind of lull at Napoleon and France, but you know, like. Several historians do liken Napoleon as being like the 19th century skinny mustache man. I mean, he caused a lot of chaos. Now, we don't really think about it because it was, you know, over 200 years ago, but he caused a lot of chaos. And if you really dig into it, you know, he can be seen as pretty controversial. Now, you know, we throw him in civilization games and we're like, haha, the short guy, hon, hon, hon.
Cheating in good faith now? An unlikely proposition. The British would never believe it. Third and finally, the situation was really not so terrible for the United Kingdom.
How could this be worse? Screams Poland and France in the background. I've seen worse.
The nation had faced.
Yeah, because for the UK, worse was Napoleon. Was it? What was worse? World War II Germany basically controlling all of continental Europe, or Napoleonic France when they were at their height? I mean, both did not end up controlling Russia. Both ended up losing to Russia, in fact. I don't know. I kind of feel like Germany is somewhat worse because at the time of Germany, obviously, they had air power and they were able to bomb the crap out of London. Napoleon was never able to do anything like that.
Worse odds before, triumphed, and come out stronger for it. The darkest days against Napoleon were far worse than what they were facing in July 1940.
Interesting. I don't know.
Britain's only real weakness were its finances. Empire was not as profitable as it had been in past centuries.
Yeah.
Luckily for the British, the Americans began making up the difference.
Hey, Dad, need a loan? Oh, yeah, but they were going to sell us their soul for that one.
Though that presented another dilemma. The whole cabinet hoped, and even expected, for America's support to continue and expand. But few, except perhaps the half-American Churchill, were so naive as to believe American aid would come without strings attached.
Oh, no. We're son and dad, but that does not mean there's not going to be some strings attached.
But from the perspective of 1940, even complete domination by America seemed preferable to that of Germany.
This is the option you're faced with. You're the British leader at this time. Who would you rather give up all your power to? It's a pretty simple guess. In fact, the Germans end up choosing America too over the Soviet Union, considering all the German soldiers that ran to the West and surrendered to the Western allies versus obviously the invading Russian force.
The Americans were a historically friendly people with common cultural, linguistic, and economic ties.
It's just really funny because all things considered, like, you know, the Brits and the Americans, we weren't really that cool with each other for a while there. I mean, we really only recently, at this time period, had become cool with each other. Like, World War I, we fought on the same side of the war, but for the most part, in the 18th and 19th century, we really didn't like each other too much.
And again, from the view of July 1940, how likely was that to even happen? Almost as unlikely as you actually being subscribed to this channel.
Subscribe!
64% of you still aren't
Hit the sub button.
subscribed. You guys are crazy watching 30-minute history videos without subscribing or even hitting the bell.
He deserves it.
If you don't subscribe
This is
right
great
now,
quality stuff.
I'm going to leave you on an isolated island and make you defend it alone against the Wehrmacht.
Hell
Or
yeah.
I guess they call it the Bundeswehr now.
That sounds fun.
God, it's like we do all this work for nothing.
He's got great German. He can speak German. I mean, to my American ear, I like his German accent. A certain eventuality.
As early as May 25th, the British Chiefs of Staff Committee presented Cabinet a report entitled British Grand Strategy in Case of a Certain Eventuality.
Ooh, so the end of the British Empire. This is the grand strategy here.
A polite British way of saying the fall of France. Now, that eventuality had become reality. The proposed strategy was to fight Germany through economic blockades, strategic bombing core and occupied territories, and, since the British could not possibly liberate the continent on their own, supporting rebel movements there until they grew large enough to throw off Nazi rule themselves.
Yeah, that is the interesting concept. Like, let's say they do ceasefire, they do a peace deal, and everything just white pieces wherever the borders are now. Boom, that's what Germany gets. This is what we get. It's dealt with in so many different alternative histories. I've talked about it so often. I mean, a lot of the times, a lot of people do predict that there would be heavy riots and revolts, and it would really depend on... I mean, obviously, there's a famous, it's called TNO, New World Order, when that alternative history, which is a very famous one, predicts like massive protests and an economically sluggish or even bearish market Germany begins to collapse in the 60s. I do think that, even if they were allowed to white peace and they controlled most of Europe, they would still face a lot of issues, a lot of struggles into the future.
Though that last tactic would prove unrealistic, as there was hardly enough resistance in occupied territory or Germany itself for the...
Yeah, that's why I'm saying in the future. Like right now, it's safe to say the Germans are probably going to rule with an iron fist for quite some time over the continent of Europe if they were to be given this peace deal.
British to support. Nonetheless...
But remember, the south of France, they were heavily fighting. There was a bunch of free fighters, Free France down there, that... was still gaining intel, and they were doing it's actually really interesting to read about what France was doing in the south of France during German occupation.
The entire plan hinged on receiving their own support from the United States.
Well, maybe in all of France, but I have specifically learned about the south of France being they made sure it was very difficult for the Germans.
Something only arriving in limited amounts at the time. It wouldn't be...
What are we talking about?
Nonetheless, the entire plan hinged on receiving their own support from the United States, something only arriving in limited amounts at the time.
Oil?
It wouldn't be until June 24th,
Resources?
the day France officiated its exit from the war, that the first large shipment of weapons were even sent.
Lend-Lease Act.
Before the British could even think about offensives, they first had to secure their home islands. This they were well prepared for, thanks largely to Neville Chamberlain's limited liability schemes. The Royal Air Force already ordered 12,000...
Very interesting. We are giving Neville Chamberlain a little bit of credit, which I think is a great... I know that we like to summarize historical leaders as black or white, and I despise that. I despise that we do that so much in memes and our current modern-day internet culture, but the truth is leaders do... a little bit of bad, a little bit of good, or they're embarrassed, but they've also done some good things. I mean, you got to kind of judge based off of how many good things they do versus how many bad things they did. You got to weigh all those decisions, but everyone is human. All world leaders, all historical leaders are human.
Chamberlain's limited liability schemes.
The
Royal Air Force already ordered 12,000 modern aircraft in 1938. In fact, the British were outproducing Germany on air, land, and sea. British air defenses
already
would quickly prove the best in the world, featuring the first ever fully coordinated air defense system, a continuous network of radars and human observers running along the English coast.
Wow.
All information about German attackers, even down to their altitude, would be collected and relayed to British Fighter Command by telephone, who
That's pretty crucial, especially for the Battle of Britain and all the things that was going to happen to London.
could then send appropriate forces to intercept. The situation for the army was not as hopeful. The BEF had left all its heavy equipment behind at Dunkirk. There were only enough rifles left for half of the 500,000 regular troops, and
scary.
none for the newly organized Home Guards. Heavy equipment was even harder to come by. The army would have
So the Germans got all that.
to be rebuilt from scratch. Anticipating invasion, beaches were mined, bridges rigged for demolition. Thousands
What
of
is this Operation Sea Lion? The Germans plan to actually successfully their own D-Day on the British Isles.
potential fifth columnists interred, and preparations made to evacuate the home islands. But the British were so determined not to let that happen, they prepared
They're gonna gas attack them? What? They were gonna nuke themselves basically, except with some spicy wind.
to use poison gas against German landings. If evacuation became necessary,
What?
special teams of guerrillas were trained to stay behind and cause
nice.
chaos for German occupiers. The government
They was ready. I think he'll probably talk about it, but don't forget about the British spirit too. Just like the normal British spirit, they sacrificed a lot during this time. Whether moving and living inside of bunkers, making sure every single light in every single home was turned off during the night. I mean, the British people themselves sacrificed. You didn't have to just be a part of the military or the government.
would then flee to Canada, where they would continue to lead the war effort.
That's another aspect of that alternative history that I'm talking. I think it's TNO, right? The New World Order. Like basically the British monarchy moves to Canada. A lot of people move to Canada from the British Isles.
Over $5 billion of assets were already shipped and waiting for them.
So they had planned for the worst, which you have time. You definitely have lots and lots of time. People forget how much time you have to plan for every possible scenario. And I only talk about this all the time because I try to do that as well. I just try to live my life, which is maybe not the most healthy way to live your life, but I'm always trying to plan for worst case scenarios. If this happens, I'm going to do this. If this happens, I'm going to do this. Boo, boo, boo. I just want to have a plan. It's hard for me to think straight when I'm in the actual worst case scenario. So I like to plan it when my life is actually normal, even if it's never going to happen. The invasion of the millennium.
On the other side of the channel, the Germans left behind their traditional audacity in favor of a new strategy of Sitzkrieg. After all,
Sitzkrieg.
the British were beaten. Germany won. All that was left was for diplomats to sign the paperwork. Many days were wasted waiting for the British to respond to peace offers.
Yeah, there's that famous audio clip of, Adolf complaining that they sent so many peace offers and we've offered peace, and they're not, whatever, responding. Well, bro, you gotta think of the context here, like, okay, what have you done in the past? Your words are clearly not trusted at all, considering the whole era of appeasement that they tried to do.
British intransigence made itself clear. The Germans had to find a new way to force their capitulation. Naturally, the submarine campaign against British shipping would continue, but
Yeah, those U-boats did cause a lot of havoc. I mean, that was a big one-up that the Germans had in the very beginning, where you can't necessarily compete with the British Navy, but you can cause them hell by just blowing them up slowly with, the U-boats and that U-boat technology in the very beginning. That was hard to overcome. That was hard to defeat.
couldn't help against the British Isles themselves. With the Kriegsmarine sunk in Norway and
Hoi
Italy's
Thor?
navy, the Regia Marina, trapped in the Mediterranean, only the Luftwaffe was capable of attacking Great Britain. The Germans learned from experience that it was not possible to only bomb a nation into submission. They'd still have to invade it. So to
Crazy. We learned that in World War II, yet sometimes we're still kind of coming to that conclusion. We're still kind of realizing that you cannot just bomb a nation into submission.
make an invasion possible, the Luftwaffe was given the lofty task of completely destroying the Royal Air Force. It was hoped that total air superiority, combined with what was left of the German Navy, might be enough to secure a corridor across the English Channel. What to do next in case of success was a little vague.
Bro, imagine, okay, so this looks like it's referencing, remember when Adolf took a picture in front of the Eiffel Tower when he occupied France? Imagine he did that same photo in front of Big Ben just to, obviously show to the world, bam, there goes British. There's got to be I feel like I've seen that before. There's got to be an alternative history where they also do the photo in front of Big Ben.
Though the possibility was brought up of returning the German sympathetic Edward VIII to the throne. If successful, this would have been the greatest military accomplishment in German history.
Oh, it's over.
One has to go as far back as William the Conqueror in 1066 to find the last successful invasion of the British Isles.
If Germany conquered the British Isles in World War II, it is over. We're going to live in a completely unfathomable world. Maybe the Germans still declare war on the Soviet Union, but at that point, it's just a 1v1, and I don't think the Soviets are going to be able to handle them, depending on when they decide to strike. But the Americans would not have a giant foothold. The Americans wouldn't have a giant ally, too, which was the British. So I don't even know if the Americans really get involved. Who knows?
To follow in those footsteps would put the Germans in the same league as the Vikings, Normans, and Romans of ages past. Unfortunately for them, the Germans were not remotely prepared for such an action. The Luftwaffe, although largely intact after its campaigns across Europe, was not designed for strategic bombing. Its ground attack craft were meant for close air support, while its fighters didn't have the range to escort them all the way to their targets. There weren't many air bases along the Channel coast either, meaning they would have to be built. All of this gave the British, with their superior...
They would need a lot more years to kind of start changing around the Luftwaffe, adopting different technology, putting more research into bombing and things like that.
Industry.
But that's really good analysis, basically, because, the German Air Force obviously was all planned for, the whole Blitzkrieg strategy and stuff like that.
Time to expand the Royal Air Force and improve their already considerable defenses. The Kriegsmarine would still have a key role to play securing the crossing and convoying troops. That so much of it was lost in Norway was unfortunate. Doubly so, now that the Norwegian ports they were sacrificed to capture were useless compared to the newly won French Atlantic ports. It would have been awfully nice if the Germans were allied to a sea power who could support their invasion.
Bro, Italy.
Though the Regia Marina was trapped in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, so Italy's not going to be able to contribute much. Spain, famously, I've talked about this 100 times, but Spain was devastated by the Spanish Civil War, so even though you had a fascist ally there, it wasn't going to be able to help much.
There was still one other friendly nation in Europe with a powerful navy.
One other friendly nation in Europe with a powerful navy? Who would that be?
The very same nation Germany had just crushed and occupied. Vichy France.
Oh, Vichy France. Oh, look at that. The French fleet. Wow, this is an epic screenshot right here, isn't it? Screenshot drawing, animation.
July 1940 may have seen the French defeated and occupied, yet it was they who held the fate of the world in their hands. The combined power of the French fleet, remains of the Kriegsmarine, and possibly the Regia Marina, if it could be busted out of the Mediterranean, would surely have been enough to overwhelm the Royal Navy and facilitate a crossing. The Vichy government, in control of the French Navy as per the terms...
This is such a great drawing. I love this. So you have Germany, Japan, Italy back there, all surrounding the port. Is this supposed to be Charles de Gaulle?
In terms of its capitulation, recognized that it held the keys to Axis victory.
The key.
Time and time again, the Vichy government would try to negotiate a role for
You don't got talent? Us have ships? It's a 9 for me.
Itself in the new Nazi system, only to be rejected. The value Vichy could provide was totally lost on the Germans, who'd never had much faith in or understanding of sea power. Hitler's animus...
Germany, even since their days of Prussia, they're an extremely formidable army. But, they just weren't really built, geographically speaking as well, around really caring much about the ocean and sea.
Towards France was so great that he would not even consider it.
Breaking of the baguette, the symbolism behind that, look at that.
Apparently, collaborating with communists was acceptable.
Love the throwback to country balls with like long stick hands. They got to use these stick hands as props.
But the French were a bridge too far. So leave a white flag emoji in the comments.
White
flag. If you also have such a delusional hatred of French people that you'd let it ruin your chances at world domination.
Well, what's interesting about that is, for the most part, Germany respected France enough, more, well, there's no question that Germany respected at least the French more than the Slavs or the Jews or the Soviets. I mean, they literally looked at them as subhuman. For the most part, Germany didn't mess with like history, the historical part of France, things like that. It's not like they didn't blow up the Eiffel Tower or the Arc de Triomphe, for example. They still respected stuff like that.
German intransigence passed initiative over to the British, who, as the world's premier seafaring civilization, understood the danger the French fleet posed. Britain first tried neutralizing it peacefully. Before their capitulation,
trade-off alert. Your fleet, you receive separate peace deal.
The British offered to free France from its prohibition against separate peace in returning for handing their fleet over to British custody.
Ooh.
However, France's peace terms with Germany stated their fleet would be interned at mainland French ports, so that clearly wasn't happening. French Admiral Darlan promised not to let the fleet fall into German hands. But even if he meant that, the Vichy government could ally itself with Germany at any time, or the Germans could even outright seize the fleet for themselves.
Damn.
Both unacceptable risks. On July
Bro should have just blown up his own boats. Just blow them up. No one can have my boats.
3rd, the Royal Navy blockaded the French fleet at Mers el Kabir and issued an ultimatum: surrender or be destroyed. The French, somewhat confused by these demands from their ally just weeks prior, rejected it.
Remember that, okay, we're going to get into it before I even get,
The British opened fire.
There was things like this that happened, where the Brits had to slap around France a little bit.
The surprised French fleet resisted as best as it could, but in the end, 4 of their 5 capital ships were immobilized, as a 5th, Bretagne, was sunk. 1 battlecruiser fled to Toulon. A few days later, the battleship Richelieu was
That's a lot of dead. That's a lot of dead.
put out of action at Dakar.
For the British to deal this damage?
In all, 1,297 Frenchmen were killed and 351 wounded. Much of the French fleet remained afloat.
I think World War II is great to learn about just for people that, see the world a little bit too, I don't know, black and white, or it's just good and evil. I mean, it's a lot more gray, and the Brits had to do some really, really questionable things. I mean, we're talking about they're oofing the French, they're sliming the French people, but let's talk about their invasion of Iceland. On the surface, that can seem like a bad thing, and if I am not very well informed on history and the context of history and all the different perspectives of every country involved, I might look at that and be like, was the British the bad guys? Why were they invading sovereign nations like Iceland? I mean, you got to look at the concept as a whole. I mean, first, I don't think he's even going to talk about the invasion of Iceland. Maybe he will, but there was a worry that the Germans were going to invade Iceland first, and that would basically surround the British, because at the time, Germany has Germany to Denmark to Norway. Then you get Iceland over there. That's going to make things very complicated. Ireland was even thought about, going after Ireland. That was a really big fear that Germany was going to invade Ireland, and then that would be a perfect jumping off point to attack the British.
But for the time being, the English Channel was secure. Only the Luftwaffe remained a threat.
And it was a threat, but luckily the Brits were going to be okay. Whoa. Sea Lion. That's crazy.
Before the German invasion of the United Kingdom, Operation Sea Lion could begin, the Royal Air Force had to be destroyed.
Yeah, they're going to have to knock out all that stuff.
The Kriegsmarine wouldn't be ready for invasion until September 15th, making that the deadline for the operation. Luftwaffe intelligence was so confident in its strength, they believed they could do it in just 4 days.
I mean, you can't even blame them for being that cocky. Just look at how impressive their list of victories were at this time. It's not shocking at all that they had just way too big of a head.
This confidence came from a very good source: the fact that they were wrong. Just a few of their intelligence failures included underestimating the size of British squadrons, assuming most British airfields weren't fully operational, thinking German fighter planes were superior to Britain's, underestimating British aircraft production by 50%, meaning they did not realize they were getting outproduced in the sky, and
That's a really big problem, but again, they were probably really right before this moment. Do I have to remind people the hella successful invasions Germany did against Poland, and then Denmark, and then Norway, and then Belgium, and the Netherlands, and then Luxembourg, and then France? It's crazy.
Having virtually no understanding of Britain's best-in-world early warning systems. In brief, the Luftwaffe massively overestimated its position and underestimated that of its enemy. While the British also had similar estimates of relative strength, it was not nearly to the same degree. The first of the Luftwaffe's 4-day mission to destroy the RAF was dubbed Adlertag, Eagle Day.
Oh.
As the Luftwaffe waited for the weather to clear and new airfields to be built, preparatory strikes were launched against British radar stations. Meanwhile, the German U-boat fleet continued its campaign against British Atlantic shipping.
Yeah, continued.
They would sink over 1 million tons between June and August.
That is a lot. That is very significant. No wonder they were causing so much havoc, especially because, the British got to pull in resources and all sorts of things from their overseas colonies like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, British Malaysia, South Asia.
A period known to U-boatsmen as the first happy time.
The first happy time. So you couldn't have come up with a more epic name? Happy Time? Really? Really, U-boats? Europe, carving it up. This is reminding me of the old... This looks exactly like the Chinese propaganda poster. I don't know who came up with the propaganda poster, but when they're carving up China, essentially, all the European figures around them from the 19th century. So they have slave France right next to them.
Until now, the neutral nations of Europe played the Allies and Axis off one another to maintain their independence. Now, with France defeated and Britain isolated, those nations would have to make difficult compromises.
Oh boy, Finland, Sweden, Spain, Turkey.
Sweden opened its economy to the Germans.
Used the railways.
Especially its shipyards, that were used to build new merchant and naval vessels for the Kriegsmarine. The Swedes also allowed Wehrmacht troops to cross their country, virtually at will. Having barely survived...
And yeah, Finland going through the Winter War.
Survived the Winter War. Finland was desperate for a partner to protect it against further predations.
Finland was going to join the Axis?
Perhaps Russia's greatest mistake in Finland was not invading it, but banning the Finns from making a defensive pact with Sweden after it failed, which left Germany as Finland's only option for protection.
Bro, that's crazy. What a backfire.
While the Nazi-Soviet pact forfeited German interests in Finland, the failed Soviet invasion seemed to invalidate that part of the treaty in German eyes. The Reich welcomed Finland with open arms.
You remember before this, they had a non-aggression pact, and that was obviously going to go away.
Following the collapse of France, Spain became rather enamored by the thought of entering the war. The Germans offered them...
Spain's an interesting story. I love talking about Spain and why they didn't join the Axis and what the consequences of that could have been. Part of the issue is Germany thinks that it's just going to be even more coastline for them to have to guard, basically, because Spain was going to be able to do it. You see how easy the British would be able to maybe land in Galicia, do a naval invasion of Galicia, and then just roll into Madrid.
Territories, including Gibraltar, French Morocco, and colonies deep into the Sahara. But the situation wasn't so simple.
Yeah, it sounds exciting on the surface on a map, but it's actually way more complicated pulling in Francisco Franco into the Axis.
Still recovering from their civil war, the Spanish insisted that Germany supply them for the duration of the conflict. But the Germans weren't interested in Spain's military so much as its naval bases. This led to ideological problems for the nationalist Franco, who was utterly opposed to ceding any Spanish sovereignty to the Germans. But, looking to eventual war with the United States, the Germans refused to drop the issue. Spanish enthusiasm was not only blunted by German obstinance, but also continued pressure from the British, who still held some sway in Madrid. By the time...
Yeah, just because you're fascist doesn't mean you always work with each other. I mean, I feel like there's always an example. The Spanish here are basically the Yugoslavia of the communist world. I mean, it was like they were the one defiers. They were like, hey, yeah, that whole Stalin communist world, I don't think we're going to be a part of that. That's what Tito says. And I guess Spain was the same way. Spain's like, yeah, the whole Adolf fascist world, we don't want to be a part of that either.
Time Allied pressure subsided and German interest swelled, Spain's own war fervor died down. Italian defeats between 1940 and 1941 only hardened Spanish skepticism.
Yeah, the Italians got pretty embarrassed, and I forget about that. They're probably just watching across the Mediterranean like, yo, our Latin brother over there, he doesn't seem to be doing too good of a job.
Spain would continue its ongoing economic, intelligence, and limited military cooperation with the Axis, but no more. And last, within hours of the fall of France, the Germans began preparations to pop the so-called pimple on the face of Europe, Switzerland. This
Quite the pimple, that's for sure.
invasion, first called Case Green, but later Operation Tannenbaum, Christmas Tree, would be developed in quite some detail, with the final goal being to
Look at that. Now, don't forget that I love the Swiss's grand strategy plan here. It's not just for Germany, but it's basically for anyone that wants to be stupid enough to invade the Alps. Switzerland is going to let you invade, but they're going to make sure it is literal hell on earth. They will become Afghanistan of Europe. That is their plan. They have bunkers, so many bunkers all throughout the Alps. They're going to continue to fight, and yeah, their nation is overall going to collapse for a while, but their people are going to fight in the hills. They're, at this time, I'm not sure how well armed they are. I know at this time they're very well armed. The Swiss people have arms and weaponry and things like that. They're kind of like a little mini America over there with the amount of pew-pew devices.
partition Switzerland with Italy. But, as you'll know, Tannenbaum never happened.
Oh, that's, yeah. This is referencing what Gaddafi of Libya wanted to do to Switzerland, basically dividing it between France, Germany, and Italy, because he was really mad at the Swiss for a second there.
But, as you'll know, Tannenbaum never happened.
I don't know if the Swiss really mattered all that much in the long... Like, why even... It's just like, why? Why would Germany waste their resources going after Switzerland? Switzerland wasn't... They were neutral, you know, yeah.
Partly because invading a country as well-armed and mountainous as Switzerland...
Mountainous, that is key.
...could have very...
Remember, they Anschlussed the other part of the Alps, Austria, so they didn't have to worry about that. That just instantly integrated. Switzerland would be a whole ordeal.
very realistically devolved into a German version of the Winter War, but also because the Germans simply had other priorities.
Like, taking the flat part of Switzerland would have been relatively easy, but a lot of Switzerland is certainly not flat. Romania and Hungary. Oh yeah, they were able to... There's going to be a race for the Balkans. Romania versus the world.
The nation most affected by recent shifts in the balance of power was Romania. Its once complicated situation had been simplified considerably. And by that I mean, it became a lot worse. On May 27th, Germany forced the Romanians to redirect all oil exports from Britain to themselves. While this helped the fuel-starved Germans, it did little to harm the British, who made up the difference from the Americas. However, Romania's other neighbors would make much more serious demands. The breakout of fighting between Allied and Axis powers was met with great enthusiasm from Moscow.
Made in the USA
The
TV.
communist plot to embroil the capitalist world in civil war was bearing fruit, freeing communist Russia to build up its strength.
Remember, what the Soviets want to do even at this time is to cause a global communist revolution in every single country.
Those capitalist factions was actively supporting the Soviets in their territorial expansion was even better. News of German victory over France, however, did not receive nearly as happy a reception. Germany's brilliant string of victories, juxtaposed against Russia's humiliating failure in Finland...
Very good point. Now, don't forget that, you know, the Soviets had some success in Poland, too. I mean, they did take the other chunk of Poland.
...threatened to reduce Russia to the...
I mean, a lot of it, I would say it was really the Germans that really knocked out Poland pretty heavily, but...
...junior partner in the Nazi-Soviet pact. Only comparatively minor victories could still be won in southern Europe to bridge the gap. Ending the Winter War freed Russia to reopen the Bessarabia question. The Germans had tried encouraging Romania to give land concessions on its own initiative, which may have been enough to stave off greater Soviet demands.
Remember that Romania... This is very new. This shape for Romania is very new. It only looked like this after World War I, when a massive chunk of Hungary was just given to Romania, which is pretty funny, because remember, like, there's a massive mountain range that goes and then just like that. And yeah, so this shape is just new. Romania's like, what the hell? Why do we look like this?
But Romania refused. So after first notifying Berlin, the Soviets...
So I'm not surprised that other powers were like, hey, bro, I don't think you need all that. Like, give us some of it.
Issued their ultimatum. Just before midnight on June 26th,
But yeah, the Soviets are going to grab a chunk.
The Soviet Union demanded all of Bessarabia and the rich province of Bukovina. Russia had no historic claims on Bukovina, so instead justified this demand with the plurality of Ukrainians living there, 38% of the population against 34% of Romanians.
Yes, because famously the Soviets really treated the Ukrainians really, really well, right?
Was given less than 2 days to respond or face invasion. Such excessive demands led the Romanians to seriously consider following Finland's example and fight.
Ooh.
But this horrified Germany, whose oil supply would then be put at risk. The Germans chose to intervene. Russia was persuaded to reduce its demands in Bukovina to just the north, and the Romanians to accept the new terms. The Red Army marched into the ceded territories. But that the Germans were able to interfere like this at all, arguably against the written terms of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, was another sign of their growing influence over Russia.
Yeah, they were like, whoa, we never talked about this.
Bulgaria and Hungary, the other two nations with territorial claims on Romania, closely watched the situation unfold.
Romania's looking really freaked out right now.
And amassed troops along their Romanian borders to exploit any signs of weakness. Romania's capitulation to Russia was exactly the sign they were looking for, leading them to demand their pounds of flesh too. The British.
It's reminding me, I don't know why I'm reminded right now of the random meme. It's not even that random, but during the prequels of World War I, with the first and second, the Balkan Wars, basically that was going on, reminded of that meme of, wow, we defeated the Ottomans. Now hopefully nobody does something really, really incredibly stupid right now, and then like everyone's staring at Romania, and it's because the second Balkan War is going to be everyone versus Bulgaria. Wait, did I say Romania? Everyone versus Bulgaria. Everyone's staring at Bulgaria. And yeah, Bulgaria did something really incredibly stupid at that time, but this is way before World War II.
Hypothetically, the guarantors of Romanian independence were hardly in any position to help. Not that they did Poland much good when they did. The Italians also opposed further damage to Romania's territorial integrity, but were not strong enough to act.
I mean, yeah,
and
Italy,
so,
just
under
chill,
German
bro.
and Italian mediation, Hungary was awarded North Transylvania on August 30th, and the Bulgarians won southern Dobruja on September 7th.
Look at that.
Romania emerged from 1940 a mutilated nation. But at the very least,
But again, their shape was so artificial at the time. It was just so, like, everyone's just like, why does Romania look like that? I mean, you could argue that after World War I, because this was all, you know, the Austro-Hungarian Empire beforehand.
had survived.
Romania's still around. It's still around. Here we go, the Eagles battling. Aldertag. Did I pronounce that right? Dang, the UK got a way bigger eagle and more epic eagle than the Germans. What's up with that?
On August 13th, 1940, weather over British skies finally cleared. Air bases across the Channel coast were completed, and Adlertag began. 4 days of some of the most intense aerial combat ever seen took place. When
We don't have aerial combat like this
the
anymore.
British were still fighting, as they would continue to do into the following week and all the way up to the end of August. Not only was the Luftwaffe unable to destroy the Royal Air Force, it had actually gotten the worst of the fighting.
Yeah, reverse card.
Losing 694 aircraft in August against Britain's 389. Before the final month of aerial combat concluded, the nature of the fighting took a remarkable turn for the criminal. On the night of the 24th to the 25th, the Germans launched a nighttime bomber raid targeting the Rochester aircraft factory. Unfortunately, nighttime navigation and targeting tools were extremely poor in 1940,
Oof.
causing them to accidentally hit civilians in northeast London.
Oh, geez.
It should be noted that the Germans had been quite strict about avoiding civilian casualties, for fear they would discourage the British from coming to the negotiating table, which
That's probably a smart move.
was the whole point of the campaign.
You just want to bring them to the negotiating table.
Plus, any assets wasted attacking harmless civilians would not help against the actually dangerous Royal Air Force.
That's a very good point. This is reminding me of how what is it again? So when the Americans started bomb raiding Germany years later, like 1944, 1943. The Americans did their operations during the daytime, and the Brits would go at night. So obviously the technology for night air bombing certainly changes in just the span of 2 to 3 years.
It should also be noted that the Germans had implemented the opposite policies in places like Poland and the Netherlands.
I mean, yeah, I'm glad he mentioned this too, because I was about to talk about it. Like, it's not like the Germans were this good person, this good guy that's like trying to save the civilians. No, they're just trying to get out of the deal. And I'm sure in the right situation, they would have absolutely done horrific things to the British population if it suited them.
Where civilian centers were intentionally bombed in terror raids. The Poles were at least getting some revenge now, as 2 Polish and 1 Czech squadron participated in Britain's air defense.
Oh, yeah, I've learned about this. I've heard about that.
The Polish 303 Squadron would even be the top-scoring unit in the whole Battle of Britain.
Yep.
The British, who had also accidentally hit civilians before, launched an immediate retaliation that same night. This raid,
immediately that fast?
intentionally targeting civilians in Germany, only achieved limited effect, due in large part to the aforementioned difficulties associated with nighttime bombing.
Yeah, I feel like this is just going to raise tensions overall and make the war escalate to even... I mean, I'm sure the war score, the world's already at 100% war rising tension. What's it called? World tension, there you go. But, I mean, this is just a way to get it to 200% bombing both sides, civilians.
By September 15th,
Of course, that was going to happen a ton in World War II. But this is still
Sea
the
Lion's
very
original
beginning.
launch date, it was obvious that the Luftwaffe had failed to destroy the RAF. Sea Lion was postponed all the way to spring of next year, before being abandoned entirely. Clashes would continue in the air, but at nowhere near the same intensity. What truly sealed Germany's defeat in the Battle of Britain was English industry. 15,049 new
Everyone talks about American industry, but yeah, definitely don't underestimate the English as well.
aircraft joined the Royal Air Force, against Germany's 10,826. The Royal Navy also grew by 1 battleship, 2 aircraft carriers, and a fleet of smaller ships including submarines and merchant vessels.
Yeah, I mean, remember, the whole Industrial Revolution started here. Manufacturing and things like that. I mean, the Brits were going to be good too. Now, I mean, obviously America is even more insane on a completely different insane level, but relatively speaking, for just their small little British Isles island, it's impressive.
The army was recovering its strength at remarkable speed. By August, it had 27 nearly fully staffed and equipped infantry divisions. Meanwhile, the Home Guard rose to 600,000 troops largely equipped by the Americans, who were finally playing the long-hoped-for role of Britain's sponsor.
Britain's supplier of all the goods. Oh yeah, I'm sure the Battle of Britain certainly helped motivate the hearts and minds of the British people to join the military, to take up arms. Like that whole phony war thing, that was long in the past, that whole appeasement and not wanting war, no one cared about that anymore. Now it was time to defend our homes. Our homes/home. Across the Atlantic. Lend-lease. Give them everything. Make them sell their soul.
Victory in the Battle of Britain didn't just secure the British home islands from invasion, it also won England the confidence of the United States. Even during
they probably started giving more stuff after that. It's like, oh, now we know these guys aren't going down. Now don't be afraid to give them our really good stuff or even more stuff.
The battle. 1,069 American planes were shipped alongside other supplies.
Dang.
More aid would come on September 2nd, when the Americans traded 50
Thank goodness we speak the same language, right? I don't know why I'm talking about this right now, but I would assume that has to help a little bit. Like on the airplane, they're probably seeing all these crazy English words. I'm sure there's probably a little bit of issues with trash and rubbish, like in the back of the plane. Where's the rubbish bin at? America's like, what? What's that? We call that the trash.
Needed destroyers for British naval bases in the Caribbean, Bermuda, and Newfoundland.
Yeah.
More aid would come on September 2nd, when the Americans traded 50 much-needed destroyers for British naval bases in the Caribbean.
50 naval destroyers? That is a lot. And we're getting naval bases in where? The U.S., British, the Bahamas?
Caribbean, Bermuda.
So is that the U.S. Virgin Islands? And then obviously this is still, remember, they still have their colonies. There's Belize. They have a colony in Belize as well. British Guyana.
And Newfoundland. The Americans also signed defensive agreements with
Newfoundland?
Canada, Greenland,
Newfoundland.
and took a new
that literally sounded like Newfoundland to me. I'm like, Newfoundland.
interest in British-occupied Iceland.
Oh, that's when we first got our little... Well, actually, we've been kind of wanting Greenland for a while, but yeah.
On December...
Well, he's talking about Iceland, but I see Greenland there.
17th, American President Roosevelt openly announced his intention to lend even more aid to the British war effort. But Congress, accurately reflecting the American public, was largely opposed to this.
Yeah, remember, the American public, we did not want it. We still were on that isolationist stuff.
Believing that if any help was to be sent at all, the British should have to pay for it. But Roosevelt won them over by
Bam! Bro's in a wheelchair.
comparing the situation
It's crazy
to
drawing.
lending one's neighbor a hose to put out a fire.
Nice.
You wouldn't charge them for it,
Nice
but certainly
metaphor.
expect it back after the danger's gone.
They're supposed to give back the water?
The president also pushed to rearm America itself.
Hamburgers, stop. But guns, yeah, that's the most American chart I've ever... This is what it looks like.
This had once been an unpopular policy in a nation where most believed direct intervention in the last war was a mistake. But under new geopolitical circumstances,
I could see that. Like, what did America get out of World War I, really? Like, I get that we wanted to, flex our power, but what were those 14 points that Woodrow Wilson wanted? Like, barely any of those actually came through. Like, what? Yeah, it's an interesting point. I'm like, yeah, what was the point of that?
Congress was far more
What did America get out of that except for a Great Depression? I mean, there was the Roaring '20s, but I think we would have got that regardless if we joined World War I or not.
receptive to rearmament. The previously emaciated Army and Air Force won multiple budget increases, but the Navy was the biggest winner. In past decades, the British were thought capable of protecting the Atlantic, leaving only the Pacific for America to defend. Now facing the realistic possibility of the Royal Navy's destruction, the Americans prepared to take on Atlantic responsibilities as well. The U.S. Navy was almost doubled in size,
USS Jonker.
with the addition of 1,325,000 tons of warship. By the time the program was completed, America could boast a two-ocean navy, large enough to fight in both the Atlantic and Pacific simultaneously.
And then after that, we were going to basically become the policemen of the ocean. We were going to patrol the seas.
The German
For
fleet
global
saw little
trade.
growth in comparison. Only 22 new U-boats were built in 1940. The seemingly impressive submarine fleet of the Regia Marina, the largest in the world, wasn't helping much either, as they were easily spotted in the clear waters of the Mediterranean.
It's funny how much you can really summarize World War II to how fast can you build things versus how fast I can destroy the things you're building. Like, that's really, and that's why the U.S. is so undefeated. Well, besides in Vietnam, but that's a different situation. Just because it didn't matter how fast you were destroying our stuff. We were making 3 times more.
By the end of 1941, Britain's situation had considerably improved since the dark days of July. The home islands were secure, the Army, Navy, and Air Force were growing, and American aid was arriving in increasing volume. But North Europe and the Atlantic were not the only theaters of the conflict.
It was clear the Germans had to deal a way bigger punch during the Battle for Britain in July, like he was mentioning. Like, I don't really know how they could have done that, what sort of things they needed to switch policy-wise, but at this point, the British were definitely not going to tap out because they had survived, and they knew they were looking good, and it was definitely too late to get your little ceasefire if that's what Adolf was looking for.
Italian activity was about to turn the focus of the war to North Africa and Southern Europe, as the Japanese, long viewed as a secondary threat compared to Germany and Italy, were beginning to act on their ambitions in Asia, a problem for both Washington and London.
Yeah, because the British had a lot of things over there. Malaysia, Singapore, what else? Oh, well, there's obviously Hong Kong. I guess the British didn't have that much over there, but obviously there was Australia, and eventually the Japanese would get all the way over to British Raj.
But that will have to be a story for a future video.
Oh!
Because this was why Britain continued fighting alone after the fall of France and how it survived. This video was funded by the British Chiefs of Staff as part of their war planning for the eventual fall of France.
Let's go.
Including their top generals, Duke Nelson, Feline Man, G.S. Rogers,
Feline
Josiah,
Man?
Karazin, Lord Inquisitor Zarius Drackhart,
What?
Pater, Swiss Cheesus, the Raven Union,
is
and
this
the
Patreon?
Union of X. And by this video sponsor,
That's a creative way to do it.
AI.
A certain eventuality is the most British way of saying, you're cooked, France. Hitler, I cannot believe that a tiny island actually stood up to us. Napoleon, first time. Kaiser Wilhelm, are you freaking kidding me? Hitler's the only got one ball. Oh, yeah, I heard about that. He only has 1 ball. Goring has 2, but very small. Himmler has something similar, but poor old Wow, what's up with all their lack of balls? And it's kind of funny because we're talking about country balls. I know this is late, but Churchill was 100% aware of what would happen if Britain accepted American aid. He knew it would establish a new world order and then end the empire. He just preferred that over a German order. I wish that we talked about that a little bit. I mean, he kind of got into that earlier in the video, but absolutely, this is talked about oftentimes. The Brits knew that they were sacrificing their empire for survival, even at the time, even as early as 1940. They kind of had to cook themselves in order to not be Germany's slave, and they definitely didn't want that. If the British Empire and its Commonwealth should last for 1,000 years, men will still say this was their finest hours, and he was right. Again, that video is by Call Me Ezekiel. I really liked that. Man, love the country ball art. Big thanks to my patrons this month. The Jewish Autonomous Oblast only has 0.6% of Jewish population left. It's pronounced Tour de Sillas, Drew. Whitegrape of the Pirates. Samuel Walker. LoreTrack. William. Scientific Soulist. Nolan. NordTyrol. Miglu the Goat. KingBearHaze. Connor Pavlik. Fredrik Tibblin. Never change, Drew, unless you want to. LuxembourgLover.